This episode is brought to you by Audible. Try Audible for free and get a free audiobook by following the link below. Few issues today are as culturally divisive as policing. Like just about every other aspect of modern society, the police have become a culture war battleground, as evidenced by the proliferation of thin blue line Punisher skulls and back the blue yard signs among people who have nothing to do with the police. Police officers are cast as either the final line of defense against societal collapse, or a hive of bloodthirsty, murderous domestic abusers. Of course, as with any topic, a bit of nuance can go a long way towards reaching a consensus. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the ever-expanding role of police in society and consider how we might radically transform the notion of policing to create a safer, better world. As a society, we face many different problems. One would assume that in the richest country on Earth, we would spend our money funding appropriate solutions to those problems. Unfortunately, that is not the case. The US has a long-standing tradition of reaching for a hammer when another tool would work better. And when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. In this country, the police are our hammer. Domestic dispute? Cops. Mental health episode? Cops. Nonviolent drug offense? Cops. Prostitution? Cops. Traffic stops, suicide distress calls, school security, homelessness, civil unrest. It seems as though the only resource we have at our disposal is the police. And more often, an interaction with the police ends in completely avoidable loss of life. As the ruling class's obsession with short-term growth takes its toll on the structure of our society, that society produces more and more serious problems. People are being forced into poverty at staggering rates. We're on the brink of a massive homelessness crisis. Our schools are underfunded and under constant threat of mass shootings. We have unprecedented levels of untreated mental health issues because our healthcare is prohibitively expensive. As these problems continue to pile up, more often than not, the police are tasked with solving them. Because of this, we've seen police budgets balloon and officers get suited up like invading soldiers, intensifying feelings of mutual distrust between the police and those they're meant to protect and serve. Now, before we get into the specifics, let me offer a small disclaimer. If you are a police officer, don't take this episode as a personal attack. You personally did not start the war on drugs or any of the harmful programs we've seen implemented across the country. That being said, the uniform you wear is used as a weapon of the wealthy and powerful against normal people who share your values and economic conditions. Your role has expanded beyond what should be expected of you, and we need to address that for the good of the whole society. It's also worth mentioning that this is not a partisan issue. Republicans and Democrats share the blame for the rapid acceleration and reckless expansion of violent policing in America. Clinton's 1994 crime bill remains a stain on this nation. And modern Republican attempts to turn the police into another battle in the pointless culture war has done tremendous damage to the conversation about responsible policing. No one side is fully to blame. With that out of the way, let's take a look at a few of the bigger problems with modern American policing. The first thing that probably comes to mind is the alarming militarization of the police in recent years. When the police are called to a scene of social unrest, it's not hard to see why so many people harbor resentment towards cops. Officers in all black, draped in body armor, riot shields, thick helmets, riding absurdly large armored vehicles, loudspeakers blaring, lights flashing, and guns once reserved for the victims of US imperialism now turned on the nation's own citizens. Police budgets have risen dramatically in recent years, culminating in what can only be considered local private armies at the beck and call of the state, the very entity so many police officers identify as a threat to their liberty. The problem with this militarization is simple. Early American police forces were specifically made distinct from the military in an effort to win the public's trust. US officials understood that if police officers were civilians themselves, the relationship between the public and the police would be much healthier. Now, all these years later, we've returned to the foolish practice of treating the police like the military. What's the most important thing in the world to the average American? Their freedom. Do you think they'll feel very free when police officers roll down their street in armored personnel carriers and Humvees? Of course not. They'll view the police as an invading army, and the police know this. They can feel the animosity, bitterness, and distrust aimed at them. Combine this fact with the not-so-subtle conditioning of walking around in full body armor and carrying battlefield weapons, and it shouldn't be surprising that the police see the public, those they're meant to protect and serve, as a hostile enemy force to be subdued. This tension is why we see so many so-called officer-involved shootings. People are nervous around cops, which can make them seem suspicious. And thanks to continuous bad press and fraternity-style in-grouping, police feel like they always have to be on alert against the violent hordes beyond the precinct walls. It's a classic us versus them mentality. Now, the police cannot shoulder all the blame here. They're given the equipment and expected to comply. But neither can we dismiss the very real problems with police culture. The job does tend to attract violent, abusive people. Studies have suggested that a full 40% of police officers engage in domestic abuse. And if you want to see how typical police officers view the public, just visit r/protectandserve on Reddit. It's horrific. The problem of hyper-militarization of police is unique to the US. Other countries, and certainly other wealthy industrialized countries, simply do not arm their police like we do. Unsurprisingly, this has led the US to the top of the scoreboard when it comes to civilians killed by cops. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, the US rate of people killed by law enforcement sits around 33.5 per 10 million, over 3 times the next worst offender. But that's just an average rate. The figures become much more alarming when you look at the actual number of people killed. In 2019, US cops killed 1,099 civilians. The next worst offender? Canada, with 36. Then there's Australia with 21, Germany 11, the Netherlands with 4, and England with 3. In other words, US cops kill more people every year than the next 5 worst offenders, 15 times over. Now, it's pretty widely accepted that US police are too heavily militarized, so we won't waste too much time here. Suffice it to say that the link between militarization, friction with the public, and civilian deaths is well established. To play devil's advocate, this is what the police are for, right? To enforce the law. I don't really think this argument can be made in good faith. But let's just say we accept that premise and move on to another problem area. If someone you love is having a mental health episode and you could summon any person to come help, what kind of person would you pick? A mental health expert, right? Unfortunately, life in the US doesn't work like that. The average person doesn't have access to quality, affordable mental health care. Without that resource to turn to, the only course of action for most people is to call 911 and hope someone useful shows up. In the vast majority of cases, it's a police officer or several who show up. Cops are trained to give people orders and defuse the situation. What happens when someone is incapable of following those orders? Orders often yelled and with a gun drawn. In fairness to police officers, this is a difficult situation, and one that they should not be called to handle. They're not mental health experts and cannot adequately assess the situation. That being said, the frequency with which police officers kill people experiencing a mental health episode is completely unacceptable. According to one database, nearly 1 in 4 people killed by police have some form of mental illness. Remember those 1,100 people killed by the police in 2019? 275 of them just needed access to mental health care. Since 2015, police have killed more than 1,200 people with mental illnesses. Again, the role of mental health mediator should not fall to the police. Instead, we should invest in affordable mental health services at the community, state, and federal level. The US remains the only industrialized nation without some form of universal healthcare, which, unsurprisingly, has earned us the title of worst health outcomes in the developed world. By building healthcare infrastructure, which needs to include mental health care, we could reduce the number of people killed by police, reduce the strain on police officers who are in over their heads, and help mitigate the stigma around mental health in America. In this situation, everyone wins. Those who need mental health care, their loved ones, the police, everyone benefits by implementing the common sense solution of actually addressing the problem. Mental health crises aren't the only times cops are called to handle a situation that should be outside their jurisdiction. They're often called to remove the homeless from certain areas. They're called in to brutalize and arrest nonviolent drug users. They're sent to solicit and then arrest suspected sex workers. They're called to handle kids who have skipped school, which often ends with them injuring those children. We've criminalized mental illness, homelessness, poverty, even childhood. We can't strong-arm our way out of all our problems. We need to consider the philosophy of divestment and investment. Divest from an already hyper-militarized and overworked police state, and invest in critical social infrastructure to actually solve the problems we face. Save the hammer for the nails, and buy some shiny new tools for the other projects. Mental health clinics as part of a universal healthcare program. Drug treatment and rehabilitation centers to replace lengthy and damaging prison terms. Well-provisioned homeless shelters and affordable housing to accommodate those experiencing homelessness. We need to disabuse ourselves of the notion that defunding the police, to use the common expression, will reduce their ability to function. On the contrary, by scaling back the jurisdiction of the police along with their excess funding, they will be able to focus on the job they're meant to do. Think about it like a bunch of ice cream cones. Right now, we have one guy with way too many scoops of ice cream, and other people with none. The people with no ice cream are having a bad time watching the other guy, and the guy with too much ice cream is having a bad time because it's melting all over him before he can finish it. If we divest a few scoops of ice cream from his cone and invest that ice cream in the other cones, everyone wins. They each have enough ice cream, no one is left out, and no one is overwhelmed. That is the idea of divestment and investment in a nutshell, or in a cone, as it were. At the end of the day, we're not necessarily calling for a world entirely without police, but a world without policing as we know it. A world where the right people handle our many and varied problems. If we do not pursue this radical transformation, our police problem will continue to get worse. But if we choose to do the right thing, the smart thing, shrink police jurisdiction and invest in common sense solutions, everyone will benefit. And that's something I think we can all get behind. The conversation around policing in America is so important, and this topic deserves much more coverage than can fit in a 10-minute video. If you'd like to learn more about the police and how they function in the US, I highly recommend you pick up Alex Vitale's The End of Policing on Audible. Pro tip, you can try Audible completely free for 30 days, and you'll get a credit for one free audiobook every month. So even if you decide not to stick around, at least go and get a free copy of The End of Policing. It's a great listen, and I guarantee you'll learn something new. As an added bonus, members now have access to the Audible Plus catalog. With Plus, you get access to the entire library of thousands of audiobooks, podcasts, and originals included in the Plus catalog. And you can listen to as much as you want. Have 10 books you've been meaning to read? Sign up for Audible Plus and listen to all of them for just $4.95. I don't think I can accurately convey how much I love Audible. I struggle to sit down and read a book, but with Audible I can get through all the titles I've wanted to, all while running errands or commuting or traveling for work. It's completely changed how I learn. If you enjoyed this week's video, I highly recommend you check out The End of Policing on Audible. It's a fantastic listen. So, if you'd like to help support my channel so I can produce more content like this, visit audible.com/secondthought or text secondthought, one word, to 500-500. It really does help support me and my channel. Follow the link below or text secondthought to 500-500. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, consider subscribing to stay up to date with my latest episodes. If you hated it, go ahead and drop a thumbs down. You can check out my previous episodes by clicking the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.